So the biggest common pitfall I've seen is we have, especially your guys' generation, you are so used to filling out online forms that you just kind of like almost have default set and don't think all the way through it as in like, this is a job application. So I see things like you haven't capitalized any word and that looks poorly, right? So there's a section in PhORCAS where you can put in a lot of your like activities and like accomplishments and leadership positions and all of those things. And a lot of people leave that section blank because they're thinking I'm attaching my CV and it's all on there. Mm-hmm. It's really helpful to have it in both places because as an RPD, those things that you put in the activity section and your accomplishments and all of that, I can sort by those. So when, especially for the really big programs, like my program's small, right? I have 2 residents. I do have to wade through about 40 applications a year. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about like the big programs. Like I have a friend who works at University of Illinois.
Okay.
They get like 150 applications for like 6 spots or however many spots they have. So they have to wade through based off of what they can search for.
Okay.
They might not even look at your entire application. So if you leave that blank and they're looking at activities, you're immediately excluded because you've done nothing for what they can search for, because they're not even going to make it to your CV until you get to that next stage. The other thing is, so for people who are applying to lots of different programs, make sure you're uploading the right letter of intent.
Of course.
To the right program, and those kind of common sense things, but you'll be surprised how many letters I get that are like, "Dear Dr. Smith," who is the program director at Mercy. You know, it's like, nope, I'm not Carmen.
I think the letters of recommendation are very difficult.
Okay.
And it's not something that I think is necessarily a fault of PhORCAS, but having seen so many letters of recommendations from different people, we kind of have, it's nice now that it's the form is standardized, because it used to just be a free-for-all letter that you would get. Some people go above and beyond when they're writing letters, and they're very specific and really give you a good insight into that person. Some of them are very vague, and you can't really tell if it's a good or bad recommendation. And it may not be that person's a bad candidate. It's just that person maybe has like so many letters to write that it's just very generic and doesn't give you a lot of insight into them. And then some people like go so overboard that it's so long for me to read, and then they attach an additional letter to it, and it's just like almost very overwhelming. So I almost, even though I like that people can explain themselves, I also think it's really hard to compare letters to somebody else. I try to look at more of who they chose to do their letters, as opposed to taking everything out of the letter, just because I don't know that always gives the best reflection of that person. But I'm always interested, like if you have a job at a pharmacy and you don't ask your boss to give a letter, then why didn't you ask your boss? That seems like a good person. Like that's more something that I look at versus, how specific somebody was about your rotation, like comparing 2 people that had 2 preceptors, trying not to be the fault of the student, because of how detailed that person was writing their letter. So I think that's really one of the hardest things to put a point value on, is there'll be letters that are more free form.
The main ones is the letters of reference. It's gotten to a point where it's almost pretty much, templated. And it's hard to read between the lines. I'm a little old-fashioned. I've been practicing a little while. Is that, the art of letter writing is not incorporated into PhORCAS. And so, it's just like, do you highly recommend, or just recommend, or not recommend? And it becomes very hard to assess that, because people just look at that radio button and that's it. And a lot of times, there is a lot of intangibles. You don't want to harpoon your student or your candidates just because you got a radio button that has 3 options. And if you put recommend, a lot of people that I have seen recent years would just like, that's not good enough. It has to be highly recommended. And I think that's a little bit too, black and white. And that hurts, I think, the candidate.
Most common issue that I've seen is, I know you haven't gone into PhORCAS before, but in the beginning, they have you put in a bunch of presentations and volunteer work and leadership experience and organizations and things, essentially taking a lot of the material from your CV and typing it out into PhORCAS. Personally, I don't like that because it's just duplicate work. But it also is really important you do fill that out, because when you don't, it makes you, 1, look like you are lazy, 2, you can't follow directions, or 3, you haven't done anything extra except go to your class and go home. So that's the most common thing I see, is that whole entire background section is just being left blank.
I think PhORCAS gets the job done. I don't think there's any big obstacles that I've noticed with it. With any application system, it's hard to get a feel for a candidate's, enthusiasm and personality sometimes, just because it's a written application. But I think it's well organized, and we're able to, get all the information that we need for the first round.
Sure.
So I was thinking about this, and one that really stands out is a resident that I ended up matching with her several years ago, and she started her letter of intent off with a quote from somebody, and I honestly don't even remember what the quote was or who said it, but it was something about working hard and those kind of things. She tied everything in her letter back to that quote. But she still did a really good job of letting me know what she wanted in a residency and letting me know what her strengths were and all of that. And it just really stuck with me because it was one of the more creative letters that
I don't know that I can pick a necessarily best letter of intent. I really like for somebody to give me a glimpse into where they see themselves, why my program. Well, how is my program going to help you get where you need to be? So some of them are so vague that I'm like, they could use this letter anywhere, and they could have just wrote one letter. So I'm looking for something that's a little personalized that makes me think okay, this is what their aspirations are, and they can link a specific thing about my program that would help them get there. So I know that they research my program enough to know about it, to really feel like it's a good fit or not. And then they have enough reflection to really know what they think they want to do, and that they can kind of fit together that would be a good match. So I think I'm just looking for people that are being very specific and always pointing out something about the program that's unique, that maybe they really like, and that really hones into what they want to do, versus something that's too generic. So I don't have a specific example, but something that gives me that sense is what's really helpful for me to know that they're a good fit and that they've really researched and understand what we have to offer.
I think the first thing I look at is the ability to write. Now, naturally, you might have a system, but I look at grammar, just the basic fundamental English, are able to write, number one. Number two is how well is that flow? And, specifically, do they know our program well enough that they have able to articulate into their letter of intent?
I don't think I have a specific best letter of intent, but kind of some of the best things that I see as, 1, make sure you're addressing it to the correct person and the correct program. You will not be surprised how often that is messed up. And the second thing I look for is, did you actually take the time to tell me about yourself and your goals and relate that into what our program can offer you? So for example, you're going back to the ICU thing. If that's your passion, have you researched our program to look at what opportunities we have available to help you in that area? And then is there anything you can provide me to help our program based on your skills and experiences? So I guess to summarize that, being program specific is the best thing you can do.
Sure.
So
I will say that the best letter of intents that I've seen are ones that specifically are related to things that our program has that potentially other programs don't have. So it gives me an idea of why that candidate is interested in my program compared to other community residency programs. And it really helps when letters of intent, they talk about specific interactions that they've had with myself or the residency team. And so it provides, us to be able to look back at our experiences with potential candidates and be reminded of those positive interactions that we've had. And I do also love letters of intent that you can sense the level of passion towards community practice and the advancement of community pharmacy. And you'd be surprised at how much you can gain from just reading an essay or a letter that the candidate writes. Sometimes it really shines through, which is really great.
Two memorable bad ones, and one of them started off, it wasn't like Dear Dr. Dell-Steinbeck or to the Residency Search Committee or like anything like that. It was, hi, my name is Dana. We went on this long journey of how she went to school to be a teacher and racked up too much student loans, so decided to quit her job as a high school teacher so she could be a pharmacist to make more money, and that she wanted to do a residency so that she could teach in a pharmacy school because teaching was her passion.
Okay.
I saw where she was going, but don't tell me you went to pharmacy school to make more money. And then the other one used a whole bunch of figures of speech, but she said them all wrong. If you're going to use them, make sure you have them right. It's one of those things where it's like, didn't you have anybody help you with this? So I really encourage everybody to have somebody read their letter of intent.
Oh, I could tell you that all day. Putting the wrong hospital name in the letter, that's obviously one. It makes a lot of sense. So that's a classic one that you just have. I know you're doing so many letters, it's hard not to get them all mixed up. And it could even be that you put the wrong letter in the wrong one. Not that I'm sure lots of things happen, but I've definitely had that happen where somebody addressed the wrong place. So that's an easy one to fix. It's easy for me to give examples being in pediatrics, but I'll have people give a letter of intent and talk about, what their career goals are. And it's doesn't mention pediatrics at all, which is okay, well, I'm not sure this is exactly the fit for you because at our program, you come in as a PGY1 and you do all pediatrics. So if that's not what you want to do and you're not sure yet, that's not really the place for you. So not being specific enough. And, I've had people tell me they want to do adult AM care or psychiatry, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know why you're applying to my program because we do pediatrics, and that's not really kind of what so definitely not matching even some of the higher level things that the programs would match up, and then obviously definitely having the wrong institution on it or addressing the wrong person is a very easy thing that can happen. But also just thinking about how specific you're being about each program is, I think, the best advice as far as a letter of intent that I could give.
Sending it to a wrong institution? No, I'm just teasing. I have there's a lot of few St. Luke's out there that they send the wrong program. But back to your question, a lot of it's too generic, too broad. And so, example, let's say they're interested in trauma or transplant. Well, our program doesn't offer those two areas, let's say. And if they include that into their letter of intent, in a way, I think that shows a lack of, investigating or do their homework before they apply to our program.
Besides the typical errors that you hear about where students have typos or grammatical errors, that can give a little bit of a window to the level of detail that the candidate has when writing scientific literature or even, personal letters. But I will say that, sometimes we do see letters that are very generic. Sometimes a candidate won't even mention community pharmacy. They'll just, talk about how they love pharmacy in general. And, in that sense, you wonder, are you able to use that same letter for all these different types of programs that are very different from each other? And so I would like the candidate to really be able to pinpoint specific things about my program that they think is a good fit for them. Because ultimately, we're trying to find a fit. It's not that I'm just trying to find the perfect candidate, but also the candidate should be super excited to be a part of our program too.